Applause, please.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you all of you for coming. I hope we will have a great session today. And as I was here for the first time in Poland and the first time at JDD, I'd like to say thank you to all organizations that made this possible, and also to all the people that are coming. Come on. There are plenty of space in the room. And I hope you will enjoy the session. So why this session? You might probably know, okay, this is the thing many of you probably may know, aware of it. By the way, how many of you are using TDD in your day-to-day basics? 1, 2, 3. So I would say still there are not too many people used to TDD, which I think then makes sense to explain a little bit about TDD and see an example. And also I think it makes sense to explain the benefits about writing the test before than doing it later, which I think there are many reasons why it makes sense. I hope I will be able to share some tips that I normally try to use when I'm playing TDD. And also I will share some live coding example, and let's see if the things go correctly. So please don't go in that way. If you want to do something else, please tweet about it or just do, but please do not run away. So who I am, I'm Nacho Cougil from Barcelona. I'm principal software engineer at Dynatrace, and we wrote code for monitoring your code, which is really cool. And I started to write code 20, don't remember, years ago, in Java 1.2, I think, more or less. And I am also the founder of Barcelona Java Users Group and the co-founder of the JBCN Conf, that now will be renamed to DevBCN. And also it's a great conference that is happening in Barcelona every year since 2015. Yes, I'm Java champion since February this year, I think. And I love the mountains. So I've been, when I was younger, I was able to run by some marathons by the mountains. Now I get, really slowly. And from time to time I try to tweet about TDD, refactoring, Java, cloud, etc. So if you want to ask me any questions, this is an easy way to ask me any questions and tweet me and mention me. First warning is everything that you will see here is based on my experience, the things I've learned with my experience, and also the things I've read, and also the practice that I've been, having a look in different projects. So please take this into account. If something is not actually 100% true, probably it's because my experience, this helps me on some directions. So I'm going to share the agenda with all of you to understand what we are going to cover. First, I want to explain a little bit about what this TDD thing came from, and also the advantages and disadvantages, the process, what's all the TDD thing process, how it goes, etc., and also some good habits on applying TDD and how to start with it, etc., and also a live coding example and the final recap. So let's start. Where this thing about TDD starts, came from, let's say, it's thanks to Ken Beck. He discovered when he was writing the first XUnit framework in about 1994. And he introduced the idea of writing the test before writing the production code, where the machines, the computers were that size. And it became, a thing when he introduced it in the Extreme Programming book. In 2000, if I'm not wrong. So it's more than 22 years ago. And also, he then later published the book around starting and working with TDD, which is in 2002. So 20 years ago, this thing started. How many of you are using it? You already say about 3 to 5 in the room. So what's going on, right? And probably many of you know, but for the people that doesn't know, there are mainly 2 schools around TDD. One is more the classicist or the Chicago style, and the other one is the mockist or London style. And there are differences between all of them. And I will say that those are complementary. Where you are using one or another, you have to identify which one is best for a particular case, but both of them are useful for your use today. So the first one, the classical one, is the one described by Ken Beck, and it's more focused on having, let's say, that your code is going to emerge when you're doing changes on your actual code. So let's say you are applying some refactors because you identify there are some code that is repeated, and then we can extract it to a method, or we can actually move something that could be encapsulated in a different class, or apply a particular pattern. We can see a particular example in an example, and then see how we can extract it as a factory or things like that. So this is the way normally the classical or the Chicago style works. And then it's more focused on the states and changes on the states and returning values as a functions. And the other side, is not the other side, but in the difference between this style and the London style is that the London style is more focused on the interactions, on the objects, on the messages that you're going to send to one class or one object to another, and then see how this interaction behaves. So then the objects, the mock objects introduced, is when I can actually identify something that would like to work as I expected. And the entry point from the London approach is more like the top to bottom. We normally start from the, let's say, acceptance test, and then going down to the internals of your actual code. And for a second, I would like to, invite you to imagine in that moment, in a particular world where you can imagine a straightforward process when writing software, that it can help you to understand and to deliver software in a particular way that is really straightforward, and at the same time, it's going to be, with some quality indeed, and also with some tests applied, which is really cool. And also, it can help that this mechanism can help you to detect defects earlier, and at the same time, it's going to help you to detect some regression errors, which at the same time is like, okay, I'm building software, and at the same time identifying possible errors that are not going to happen in production, and I can see right now running a test that I could make a mistake that will not arrive to production. I think it's also really cool. And also at the same time, you will have some security that you are building and evolving your software because you have your safety net. You are building tests, and then you are growing your production code, but at the same time, you have a safety net. You have already things that you already describe it as a test that can help you saying, oh, probably I don't need to do in that way because those tests are in red. Let's continue imagining that beautiful world where you can actually think about how somebody will use your component, how your pieces of software of classes that you're building, something is going to help you to guide you how somebody will consume it. The tests are also live in documentation. You will see in the live example how this is possible. And also, your software is likely to have less bugs, and it's going to be cheaper to maintain. I've included in the presentation, I will share later, by the way, I've included in the presentation 2 links. That one is a particular case by IBM in 2003, that they identify that when the teams are applying TDD, they found that they have about 40% of the bugs they are detected while they are building the software, not while you have it in acceptance or you have it in revision or in production, which is also a nice advantage of building first the test and then building the production code. And also I include that the other reference is a kind of recompilation of articles, also for private companies and for public administration, where you can see difference between when the teams are applying TDD, there are some advantages and also some investments that you have to do. But again, there are some few benefits. But probably many of you will say, okay, Nacho, but you're telling me a bit the story that this is really cool. It's always going to work, and everything is perfect with TDD. Well, that's not exactly true. TDD has a lot of disadvantages. And the first thing is that it is not so easy to start. So probably if you start looking for learning about TDD, you will see that there are a lot of places. And I will say that there is no easy places to start with. And everybody says the same. Start with simple things, simple katas. You will see in a minute why. And also has a learning curve. It depends on how complex your software is, how tangled your code is, how stable your code is. And if this is difficult, probably applying TDD in this kind of, let's say, projects are going to be really difficult because it depends on your engineering capability, how you can extract things that are already tangled. This is already, the problem is not TDD. The problem is how your design, your software is already done or has been implemented in some particular way. And at the last point is that it can be a really large investment. If you are not used to it, you might learn first how to approach it, to design tests, to explain tests first, and then later on come and apply it in a particular project. So it takes time and effort for many of you. And yeah, it's really easy to forget. If you are in a team or in a particular company that doesn't provide you the space to experiment and to see how this works for you, for your team, it's going to be difficult. It's going to be difficult to maintain, difficult to adapt it, and also it's going to be difficult. At the same time, provokes resistance to the people. So many people will say, okay, this TDD thing is not going to work for me because I tried years ago in another project and it haven't worked. TDD always works for simplistic approaches, for simple kata, simple exercises, and it's not going to work for big projects. And this is not true. But even though, at least in my experience, it happens that for the people that has some bad experience, it seems that for them they are not working, and then they provoke some resistance because then there is another problem around it. I will explain it to you in a second. And also can be corrupted in a simple way. So having to apply TDD, it means that you're going to have high level of code coverage. But it's not on the way around. I mean, we are not pursuing a high level of code coverage and then applying TDD. It's the other way. You use TDD, and then as a secondary, as an auxiliary thing, apparently you will see that you will have a lot of high code covered by test. That's why it's interesting to apply also TDD. But at the end, yes, it's extremely difficult to master it, because then you have a lot of things to learn, and at the same time apply it to a particular piece of code that is the one that you are looking for. And probably many of you will have a face like that. So still, I don't know what this thing is all about, and I don't see what's searching, what it's looking for, and how it goes, how it is. Probably many of you have learned to code, let's say, some time ago, like driving a bicycle, riding a bicycle. But now imagine that you have to ride or learn a different bicycle, no? It's going to take you more time. No, it's going to be a bit more difficult for you, but at the same time, it's going to be funny. When you realize it, and at the end, at the very beginning, it's going to be difficult to maintain the things, but at the end, it's going to be funny. Let me tell you then, what does it seek? What the TDD seeks is basically looking for a mechanism to help you design and build your software with more confidence, more with the ideas of building boxes, let's say, that can actually be connected somehow and be disconnected as soon as you can, or as you wish. So it's better basically to be able to compose your elements, your software, by creating the test and then applying, and then later on evolve your project. Nothing than that. Around the process, I will continue explaining. Probably this image is really, let's say, probably many of you know that let's say, picture. And this is the main process around TDD. It's nothing more than that. The first step is to create a test that is failing. It's see that this test that we are creating is failing. The next step is move it to a green state, which is, OK, we have this test that is failing. Let's do the minimum thing that we have to do to pass it to green. Let's say how we can solve that, no? And the next step is, OK, we have already the test working. Now having this picture that we have with classes, this test, etc., can we do it better? Can we just clean it somehow and see if we can do some changes inside without changing the behavior? So the idea more or less is to specify what we want to achieve, specify the behavior, the first step, the red one. This is what we want to build. The second step is, OK, now we want to build this, how we can process it in an easy way. And the next step, the last one is, OK, this is already working. But can we do it more beautiful, let's say, in the engineering perspective? And then with this picture, this is a cycle that we have to follow. Let's continue with some good habits. The first thing is always I would recommend, to learn and practice with many people is pretty common to say, but at the end, it's like start by little. As I mentioned before, do not try to use TDD in a real project where you don't have the custom around it, you don't have internalized it already, your process. Start by little, starting personal projects, starting proof of concept, starting small projects that do not have a real great impact in your customer, because then it's going to be a bit more complicated to demonstrate that TDD has some values. And of course, try to practice. Try to internalize it by practicing one day or another at your home with your colleagues, and see how an example can actually motivate you to use another example, another exercise, and see how this works. And practice with somebody else. This is something that probably many of you are aware of it. Pair programming is one of the ways that you can actually share with somebody a problem, and then I will say in a minute, I will show you in a minute how. And then, yes, of course, have a look on online content. There is a lot of online content, and also read some books about pair programming. Probably many of you are aware of it. How many of you are using or applying pair programming? Nobody is using pair programming in your, OK. Well, then it's an interesting topic, I think, to explain. To summarize it, is an exercise where you are with another colleague, in the same problem, let's say, focus on the same screen, where you are basically focused on the same problem. You have two roles. One is the driver, and the other one is the navigator. The driver is more focused on arriving to a particular finish line, let's say, driving to the direction of this is the achievement that we want to do, let's say, building this kind of new feature that we want to implement. And the other is the observer, the observer navigator is basically having a look on the strategical way, see it in the future, identify the problems that we can have, and just introduce things that probably we don't want to have it in the small let's say space where we are actually implemented that particular feature. So the idea is that those roles can be basically swap, and you can actually have your colleague having one role at a particular time and then swap it and use it then later on you. With this swap, you're going to do not only sharing your knowledge, but at the same time, you're going to review your code. So at the same time where you're building your code, your colleague will tell you, hey, well, we can do that in that way because somebody else did that. Oh, yeah, that's a good idea. Then we can apply it while we are building the software, not later on when we have probably a pull request that is already there, and somebody will tell, oh, this is already done. Those kind of discussions are really helpful when you are pairing with somebody else. It is live reviewing at the same time, which is also a really nice benefit of applying our recommended content. I have 4 recommendations about those 4 books. The first one, The Growing Oriented Software Guided by Tests, probably is, in my opinion, the best one to understand and explain how to start with a project with applying with TDD and how to evolve a project with tests. The second, the test-driven development, my example from Ketbeck is, let's say, the main one, the original, and also a bit idealized, I would say. But it's the main, let's say, the Bible about starting to working with TDD. The other that I will recommend is Test-Driven Development, a practical guide by Ron Jeffries. And it's more focused on the graphical user interface and examples with other, let's say, different areas. And the last one is The Art of Unit Testing, that I have some examples. They are in C#, but I think it's really, really easy to read and really easy to follow. About the naming, well, I have my opinion about it. More content that I recommend you is to follow at least 2 basics concepts around what is a test double, what is a double, what is a mock, what is a stub. Martin Fowler in his blog has a lot of articles that explains really well all the concepts, and I recommend you to always to have a look. About online content, I recommend you 3 channels about test-driven development, continuous integration, etc. Dave Farley has in his YouTube channel a lot of videos, related with TDD and all these things, and about having a technical and hands-on approach. James Shore and Jason Gorman has more a Java exercise and examples where you can actually start having a look and see how a project could evolve working with Java and also doing it by yourself, which is also another good way to help you to understand how to do it and then also to play, let's say, a bit at home. Going deep into some good technical habits that I recommend you when writing code, let's say. Probably some of you will agree with me, but some are probably a bit different. I will try to argument all of them. But the first thing is try to write the test and see that the test first is failing. It's one of the process I explained it first. When you are starting, at least with TDD, it happened to me, that when you are starting with the process, you try to write a test and then actually go and implement a method that solves that test. But if that test is, you haven't, let's say, confirmed first that the test is not already failing, probably that test is not necessary, it's not required. That's why this is one of the reasons I recommend you always to write first the test, see that the test is failing, and then proceed and implement whatever we want. Each test has one reason to fail. Can I imagine that many of you have found many tests that has more than one reason to fail and then identify what's the reason of this? Could be, depending on the test, really difficult, no? So this is a simple thing that could help you a lot to then later on demonstrate what's going on, or what happened in a particular case. And the last one I will show you in a second is write the assertion first, and you will see how this could work. Few things about technical, let's say, details that I also recommend you is to use that particular naming convention. Instead of having the class that normally we have as a test class, no, that ends as a test, I recommend you to end up as a suffix saying should. And ending with that suffix, you will say there's no real benefit around it. Well, I think there's a small real benefit that is then everybody, when you're looking and naming whatever is happening inside or related with that class, you should start with something. Should means that then later I can describe my behavior. You don't need to know what is session replay resource beacon parser, but understanding that it should do something, the next of the phrases are going to be explaining behavior. What it's going to do? It's going to do that, it's going to check that, it's going to return whatever, it's going to fail on whatever reason. You're going to be focused more on the behavior. This is the result of having this small test, let's say, summarize it. You don't need to understand what session replay, whatever parser is doing, but if you, let's say, minimize the name of the test, you're going to understand much better what is the reasoning about it, what is going to covering and what is not covering, which is actually the good idea about not having to go into the details on every single test and understand what we are covering, what not. So at the end, our tests are going to be more clear, and we are more focused on the behavior, which is really good. About creation order, I commented before that I recommend you to start with the let's say with assertion. I will show you how to do that. So the idea first is to start by the naming of the class. The second would be the name of the method, what we want to implement, no, as a what the implementation of the behavior we want to do, and the next is to define and what we want to check. And you will say, okay, Nacho, but now I don't have this assertion, this state, and neither I have those previous state in your actual code. If I do that in that process, and I will say, yes, that's true, but this is why we have IDs, right? And then I'm gonna do that in order to explain you in the live coding when I'm gonna show you how to do that. But why I need to do that in that order? Because if I already know what I want to check, then later on the rest of the things will come up later. What we have to do, one, I know exactly what I want to check, is then later on trigger the code. Let's say then later, okay, I know this state should come from whatever calculation I have to do. Then later I can trigger it, and at the end later what we have to do is to do the setup. Probably, in this case, I have a state that I know that came from a calculation or something, and this calculation requires another thing. But I don't need to focus in every single step on the picture. Probably I only need to start defining the assertion, what we want to achieve, and then later on describe the things going up. So the order, normally, I try to apply it from the bottom, going up, and people are getting with his minds like, okay, this cannot happen. I will show you in a minute. And yeah, I think this is it. So I'm going to try to use some live coding example. And you know, when live coding happens, things can go wrong and things can go well. But yeah, so let's try to do this. Okay, let's imagine that we are arriving to a startup company that is focused on, selling rents and films over the internet. Probably a business that many of you might get used to it. And our product managers are recommending that they want to have a new feature that can give us the list of recommended films. So probably your users are gonna rate the actual films, and then we have to, let's say, build a service that can return a list of films that are recommended, ordered by a particular average rate. And the idea is that the film should contain some properties, an ID, a title of a year when it was published, some tags, and also the genres. And here you have an example where I can see more or less how the service could look like, at least the method that we wanna call. So let's see if I can do it. Okay, so let's do a create project. Can you see my screen, right? Okay, I cannot. Oh my God, it's gonna be difficult. Film recommendation service, yes. So basically I'm gonna try to use it Java 17. I'm gonna use with with Gradle, sorry, and I'm gonna save it in that file, in that process, that folder. Now I would like to see IntelliJ here. Hello. I don't know why I cannot see any IntelliJ here. So let me see. Now I can see IntelliJ here. Okay, good. So I'm not going to use any particular sample code that you can see that was included. And now, so the first thing I'm going to do is to show you. Can you see, by the way, all the code on the bottom of the room? Yeah, cool. I can make it a little bit bigger if you want. So the main thing I'm going to start is to describe the dependencies that I normally use. I don't like some of the assertions that by default JUnit has, or at least I think I have some, or I'm used to another library that is more used for the assertion, which is called AssertJ. And also I normally use another library that for, let's say, describing objects as a mock objects, which is Mockito. So in my case, I'm gonna use that and introduce that dependencies for using it in my actual demo. So let's start. How we're gonna start? Can somebody help me? How we're gonna start? Yes, with a test. You're right. Okay, so everybody's happy to be here. I hope you already follow me. Yeah, film recommendation service, right? This is the thing that we want to implement. How is the suffix that we have to use? So I recommended that we'll should. Yeah, right. So this is the idea, to create a should unit that can help us to describe now the behavior that we want to implement. Which kind of behavior we want to implement? Let's go back for a second here. What we found is that we have to build a service that returns a list of films associated with a particular genre. Okay, it must be ordered by an average rate. Okay, so let's do like this. Film recommendation service should return films filtered or by, let's say, by genre and ordered by average rate. No, this is exactly what we want to do, right? Yeah. I'm going to do now, as I mentioned, the assertion first, because this is one of the things I would like to do as I commented to explain and describe all my implementation. So what I know is I have to do a film recommendation service. And when I call that method that I have to describe here, let's say film by genre, no? Because I have to use this method, something like this. And in the example, they say is science fiction. So let's do it like this. I'm going to follow the same example, science fiction, and it has to be equal to something. I would like to demonstrate that this is working, and when this is already correct, then my test is passed, and then it means that the production code will be ready to work. And because I don't know right now how to obtain that, I'm going to describe it as expected films. For me right now, it could work. And now what I have to do is to basically import that and make it more easy to read, because otherwise I'm going to not be able to show you everything. I'm going to create all of these things that, as you can see, are required for building, for filling, let's say, the test, because the test is still not working, is not still is not compiling. I'm going to create now the list of things that I have to do, and now the first thing is probably the list of films. As you can see, the ID is telling me, hey, you don't have, Nacho, still a lot of things, but this is true. I mean, I haven't created anything yet, so let's go step by step. And yes, this is production code. I'm not going to add the film in the test because it should be a production code, right? It's something that we want to deliver to our let's say, partners, the partnerships, or, well, the product managers. And this is the list that we want to let's say, build that should basically be returned here. It probably they say, oh, you have to introduce it and also initialize it. Naturally, I already have been doing it right now. Now I have to create a service that should be this film recommendation service. As you can see, the ID is telling me, hey, I don't know what is this. Probably this naming could work for us, right? I'm going to create that, again, not in test, in production. I'm going to move it to the right-hand side. This is another recommendation I normally follow. Try to put, when I'm pairing with somebody else, to use the test on one side and the production code in another, because in that regard, I will say exactly how we are going to evolve the test and at the same time see my production code evolve. So here I'm going to, let's say, well, probably my ID is telling me, hey, what are you doing, Nacho, that this is not already initialized? Let's initialize it. And then I'm going to continue, let's say, finishing the test because it's not already working. No, IntelliJ is detecting that this is a Boolean. It's not a Boolean. Should return a list of films, right? This is something that we already know. And this is, yes, a list. And this should be the genre that I'm going to use. Now, I think that now, finally, I have a test that can run. What is going to happen? Yes, it's going to fail because actually it has an implementation that is returning, a failure. Now I have to think about how we can actually continue with that. Is the test already working? Well, at least it's running, but it's not actually expected as define it or design it as expected. Why? Because I don't have here a list of expected films. I only have a null pointer that I need to fill somehow. The idea now is to be able to have a list of films and then be able that the service can return this list of films. How we can do that? Well, for the sake of the demo, I'm not going to, let's say, do really something magic. I'm going to create some constants and then use it here. So I have here some Scratch files that are basically two films. I don't know if you can see it properly, but basically two nice fields of science fiction, which is Matrix, and the other one is Star Wars Episode 4. I like it very much. And I'm going to copy it here, if you don't mind, just to see that the description of those constants are the ones I'm going to use. As you can see, the Matrix film and the Star Wars film, they share the same construct. It's not really complicated. It's basically the ID of the film, the title of the film, the year when it was published, then here the list of tags that they told us that any film has to have, and also the list of genres that this film has. So they're similar with Star Wars. And then I'm going to use all of those two in my actual test. But as you can see, the argument of this is not compiling because if you remember, I created, let's say, automatically this class, but it's not really working. Another super thing that I don't want to spend you too much time is basically to, instead of create a class, I'm going to create that record that is basically exactly the one that we need. The IDE, the string, the title, the year, the list of tags. Nothing really fancy, right? Only is a record that I'm gonna use here. Now, in theory, my test is actually at least compiling. Now I can use the constants I already commented before, right? And use it here. Now I can pretty much say that my test is more or less described. No, at least I have two constants that I'm going to use, and then when my service is going to run properly, it's going to return this kind of data that will like to be really the data that we're going to retrieve from a real database. And talking about database, I don't want to use database now because I'm working as a unit test, and as you can imagine, unit tests should be really fast and should not depend on any other thing. That's why I'm talking about database, because I'm thinking, okay, my product manager in my actual company, they have a database, and normally I try to connect or via database or via API to a source of data. And I have to use that to connect and to save that data and then retrieve it to third party, let's say an API, a service, whatever. So right now I'm thinking how I would like to implement that solution to get this information and retrieve it from our service. Well, in my case, for example, let's imagine that we have a database and we like to connect to a real database. In that regard, I don't want to use that right now here. I mean, a unit test, I don't want to create a connection to a real database because this then will not be a unit test. It will be an integration test. For doing that, what we can do is to imagine which kind of piece will actually manage this. In that case, I normally use a component or a pattern, a software pattern that is follow to try to, let's say, implement something that could actually have access to the database and manage all the things related with loading records, and then selecting some information, deleting data, saving data, etc. This is a repository. What we can do in that case is use a repository that can handle for us all the connection to the database and all the complexity around mapping things and selecting things in the order that we want, etc. If you agree with me, then what we have to do is to introduce a repository. Well, let's do that. How are we going to do that? Implementing here and write the code directly in production? No. I'm going to try to drive it through a test. So how to do that? Well, let's say what we have to do here is probably describe something that the repository will do when the repository is implemented. Then this production code will work exactly as I want. So let's say that I'm going to use film repository here. That now I'm going to, yes, create that variable. Not here. I prefer to do it in the field side, yes. And now I'm going to describe this object. That should be something like this, right? Film repository. Again, not in test. Should be production code, because then I'm going to use it to connect to a real database. And then here, I'm going to use it, let's say, on the production side at some point. What we have to do here, of course, is create this constructor and use it. I was not using right now. So I'm going to use it and create that field and assign it to it properly. As I mentioned, I don't want to connect right now to a real database, but I want to do to describe the behavior that I want to provide, let's say, to a repository. When the repository is working, is implemented, then this will work exactly as it is. So I'm going to use Mockito.
Use an interface over that, but just a class, not an interface, but you use the class to create a film repository.
Can you repeat again?
Yep. Which is a class.
Yes.
Why don't you use an interface?
Yeah. So the question was why I'm not using an interface for using the film repository. I injected already a class. Yes, I'm designing, let's say, a solution for the sake of the demo. I don't want to, for example, I haven't used Git for doing any simple step and commit the solution, then push it as soon as I can to any branch that anybody can actually use. The same thing for repository applies. I don't need to use an interface right now because I will not have any other implementation. So for those cases, I normally don't try to use an interface, but this is not pretty normal in Java world to create interfaces and then only have one default implementation. And why do you need that? No? But good question, thank you. So yeah, I was actually defining here the repository and the behavior that I would like to have. And when the repository is working, then this service should actually work. And the idea of this film repository should return, let's say, the films by genre, science fiction. Come on, Nacho. And then ordered. I know they have to be ordered, but I would like to, now I'm thinking how somebody will use the repository. And now, probably now, but not in the future, somebody will use another kind of sort order, and then somebody will actually need to use this method, but using another kind of order. What I can do is to include it here, like films or order and by average rate. I'm designing the solution at the same time I'm describing the test. That's why it's a bit, people are scared sometimes. But yeah, the result is more or less, more like this. I know that when the film repository is going to be called with these particular parameters, I'm going to return the expected films, which means this is the description, the expectation I would like to have, and then this is the thing I would like to see. OK, let's start just by filling the things that I already know, that this is the film sort order that I would like to add it in production. And then, yes, I have to create that. That should be an enum. That's OK for me. This expected films, what happened? I don't have the expected films. Expected films. Expected films. What's going on? Expected films. Well, OK, let's create that method. Again, IntelliJ is not detecting that the things I like the most. Don't know why. But this should be the list of films, right? And this should be the genre, and this should be the sort order. So now I'm going to fill that. Still, the test is not working. But let's see what's going on right now. It's failing. It's failing because it's telling me, oh, field repository is initialized. It is null. I know because I already created here as a field of my test class, but I haven't done anything yet. What we have to do is to basically, as I was describing here, to activate that method, right? To be able to initialize the repository properly. For doing that using Mockito, there's many ways to do that, but I can do it that way. It's really easy to, with an annotation. I'm not a really fan of annotations, but it's really easy, let's say in this class, in this case, to do something like this, to be able to describe the behavior, to mock the film repository that I want, and see that this is actually the method I would like to check. Still, the test is not working, because now I haven't called my repository, so it still is not working at all. Let's call it. Now I'm working in production side. Let's run the test now. OK, the test is green. What I've been doing, I've been describing a method, creating a service, describing a repository, and saying, when this repository is done, is implemented correctly, my service will work, which is pretty cool. And I also write that, yes, a bit of test that is a bit verbose, but this is because of the language, not because of any other things. It's because this is the things I require for building that. How we can continue now? Because now the problem that we have is that we have a film repository, but we don't have anything. What we have to do to fill that in production, what will you do right now? May I ask you? I will continue. I need to implement the repository, right? So the thing now is to implement the repository. And for doing that, what do we have to do? I expect create a test. Yeah. Thank you. So the idea now is to create a test for implement that repository. But now the question is, do I need to create a unit test for the repository, or we want to actually connect to a real database? I think in that moment I need to connect to a database in a real database and connect and see that the connection and the mapping and the things that we would like to run is working properly. Because this is exactly the things that I would like to do in production: connect to the real database, get the data from a database, and then return it properly. So let's do it like this. I normally try to rename it or use a suffix saying IT, but you don't need to do that. You can actually follow the same process that we were commenting before and put it in a different place, in a different folder, include there all the integration tests, and then run all of them. So let's create a test that should work for us. What we have to do is to film repository should return, right, a list of films, by filtered. No, they have to be filtered by genre, and at the same time ordered. Yeah, ordered in this case by average rate. Yep. OK, so how we are going to start? As the same as we did before. I have to, let's say, do the assertion first and see what I'm going to do. I'm going to use the film repository and then call that method that is the films by genre. And the same case, and I don't want to explain too much time. And then here I have this film sort order that should be average rate. Come on, yes. Why is here? and then return, no, should be equal to what? Expected films, right? I don't have all the things here, but I know that I have to return expected films. I can do exactly the same thing here as I did before, right? To create a list of expected films, and then when these films are already populated with the data I know that they have to be, then this will work. So what I'm going to do is I create a local variable here that should be exactly the film repository, and now I have to let's say, initialize it. Right now, this is still failing because the expected films is not, let's say, defined, it is not implemented. But now I have another test I have to, let's say, fulfill. I have now a test that is saying me, hey, Nacho, you have to return the list of films. Still, I don't have the list of films already here. If you don't mind, because this is already done on the service, and for the sake of the demo, I'm going to create a class to encapsulate and move all the constants, and then we can do it easily. Otherwise, it's going to be more difficult, to work and going to take more time. So something like object mother is a typical pattern that you normally, I normally try to apply when encapsulating some constant objects in the test side. Yes, do everything, please. And then because I moved this, I'm going to run the test again. Probably I haven't break anything. Normally when the IDE is doing things, nothing is break, but it could happen. Yeah, so now I'm going to use the object mother to include here matrix and do the same thing with the Star Wars. Still now I'm going to, now I'm running the correct test, and as you can see, the implementation is not done. Now I have a test that could help me to connect to a real database. How to do that? Well, there are different ways to do. I can actually load a database right now and do it manually, or connect to a development test that somebody could provide me. I'm going to use test containers. I don't know how many of you know test containers. You know test containers. There is an interesting session later on talking about test containers. So I'm not going to explain too much about it to not having the surprise. But I'm going to use, it's a library that somebody can actually wrap it up for you and do boot up for you all the Docker images that you would like to have in a particular state. So this is something really cool, because then I can actually use a database, boot it up a container, create a state with that, and change it or load it as I want, and then do the test that I want to do. So this is something I'm going to do. And yeah, I'm going to include here the dependencies. Let's load the Gradle dependencies again. And now here I can actually use it properly in my integration test. So let me show you in a second, because this is more like a boilerplate that I have to do. This is the annotation for running the test as a test container. And here I don't know if you can see it, but I can define here the image that I would like to use. In this case, I'm going to use Postgres as a SQL database. And here I have a init SQL, which is a script that I'm going to use for defining the status of the model of the database. Later, I'm going to expose some ports. I'm going to start the container. And then here, I'm going to use it with a pool, a connection pool, to connect it and use it properly. Nothing really fancy. Basically, so I'm going to connect to a real database that I'm going to pop up and boot it up. Now, if I run this test, in theory, it's going to take a bit more time, probably a few seconds, because test container will try to start and boot it up. As you can see, 3 seconds, not that much. But as you can see, it cannot load some scripts. Yes, this is the thing I'm missing. I'm going to show you the script of the database. Let's imagine that we have already our database. But if not, this is the schema of the model that I want to use. From one side, I'm going to use films that has this title, year, etc. For the other side, I want to use users that have their own information, IDs, names, etc., and also the ratings, what the users will like, and the number that they give us for the very different film. So here first, you can see the users, John, Mike, and Luke. And here we have some films, Matrix, Star Wars, and Up. Those are really nice images, nice pictures, films, sorry. But for example, Up doesn't have anything related with science fiction. You can see here science fiction. Science fiction appears in Matrix, and it appears in Star Wars, but doesn't appear in Up, because it's not a science fiction movie. And here you can see the average rates. So for example, in this case, John, Mike, and Luke have voted Matrix by 8, 9, and 8, so 8.3 or less. And the second here, we can see Star Wars as a 7, and the last one is Up with 9. But as I mentioned, Up doesn't have is not a science fiction movie. Okay, so let's see with this script, we can actually load the database and run our test. If we do something like this, should be able to copy it here, run it, and see now if the test, what is going to happen. The test, in theory, is not going to work because I haven't done anything yet. I haven't connected to anything, and still the method is failing. What I would like to do now is to do the real job, which is connect to the database, do the SQL sentence that I need, filter by the data that I know, that should be the genre, and then order by the film sort order, and then the result map it properly to the list of films. So it's not really, I think, complicated to use pure JDBC, for example, to connect to a real database, and then map it properly to a list of films. This is something that, for the sake of the demo, I don't have too much time. I'm going to show you how I propose to do it, and then I'm going to show you how we'll do it. So here you can see the method that is purely getting a connection from the database and then run the SQL. That the sentence is really easy, just having a like with the genres that you're providing, and then having the sort order by the order that you provide me as a method. And then later I'm going to, let's say, set it up the properly data that I need, and then map the values as the list of elements that I have to return. And just map it properly with the information from the film, the IDE, the title, the year, etc. So nothing really fancy, and if you don't mind, please don't do that in production. But let me see if now I'm doing it correctly. Yes, so this is a pure, simple implementation to connect to a real database, run the SQL, and then get the data let's say, populated properly with the film. Now, as you can see, the data source is not already assigned because I forgot to add it here. So what I have to do is to add it as a constructor, and then now I will probably be able to connect to a database. So if I try to run now the test, the test is green. So now what I have done is to build a list of tests that is actually interesting in the terms of implementing a service. And now I have a full solution that is based on a service that needs another piece that is already covered by tests, an integration test, that was able to connect to a database, and is actually something that I can actually provide to somebody that can go and put it in production. And I've done this, everything driven by tests, which is another completely cool thing. Now, can you see on the right-hand side the code coverage that I have? Everything, almost everything that I wrote is already covered by tests, which is really cool. At the end, I only have few lines here that are the exceptions that are not being tested. Yes, right now, I don't care about it. If there's any particular exception, probably the map that I did for the particular column has been changed or something like this. But then 92%, well, almost 94% of all the code is already covered by tests. One in unit test and one integration test, which is, I think, really cool. And now I'm ending my presentation. If there are no more things, I'm going to finish my presentation with this small recap. I hope you have seen TDD helps you to, let's say, design and build software in another particular way, I would say an effective way, and build more modularized software in terms of being able to compose your software in pieces that you can actually then connect each other. And I know it's difficult to adapt because at the end it's not a new mechanic, but it's not really new, as you saw, and it's really difficult to maintain its practice. But at the end, I will help you. I will say that it's worth to give a try because at the end, it's going to have some really benefits in your projects. That's going to be cheaper to maintain. It's going to be easy to refactor your changes. So it's really, really interesting to have it and to use it. So I've shared some tips that I normally use in my day-to-day basics, and I hope make your life easier. And yes, I recommend you to pair and somebody can help you to understand how it works and do with somebody else. And yes, try to practice and practice because that's the master of the idea of arriving to the moment where you interiorize it and then understand how you can make it much better. Yeah, this is it.